The year is 1462. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror who shattered Constantinople's legendary walls, stands frozen at the edge of his burning royal pavilion. The greatest army on earth, 150,000 strong, elite janissaries who had never known defeat, is collapsing into madness. Not from cannons or a pitched battle, but from 6 hours of pure, engineered nightmare. Thousands of his finest lie dead in the dark, many cut down by their own comrades in blind panic. Tents blaze, horses scream and stampede, gunpowder wagons erupt in thunderous fireballs that turn night into hellish day. Conflicting orders echo in Turkish, "The enemy is here. Protect the Sultan. Form ranks in the east." All screamed by shadows in Ottoman garb. The empire's invincible machine has turned on itself, and at the heart of it all rides one man, Vlad III, the Impaler, leading the spearhead charge himself. Disguised days earlier to map every tent and password, he unleashes 7,000 Wallachian cavalry in perfectly coordinated strikes from 7 directions. Scouts slip in first to set fuses and cut tethers. Then the muffled hoofed riders explode through the perimeter, screaming false commands to sow confusion while they carve toward the Golden Crescent pavilion where Mehmed sleeps. This wasn't brute force. It was surgical terror, darkness weaponized, routine shattered, an empire's pride broken by the boy who once memorized their guard rotations as a hostage. This is how a desperate prince forced the conqueror of Constantinople to flee in shame. This is the night attack at Târgoviște, the moment fear conquered the Ottoman Empire. To understand this night, you have to understand a fundamental law of power: strength is a liability when you don't know who to hit. Mehmed had the numbers, but Vlad had the shadows. By the end of this story, you will understand why the conqueror of the world's greatest city fled from a man with almost no army. You will see how a childhood spent in a golden cage prepared a prince to dismantle the world's most disciplined military machine. We are going to look at the specific tactics, the linguistic deception, and the terrifying final image that forced an unstoppable empire to turn around and go home. This wasn't just a raid. It was the moment history realized that terror is the only weapon that can stop a giant. Before we go into the blackened fields of Wallachia, I want to ask for your help. Small channels like mine rely entirely on people like you to grow. If you value historical storytelling that focuses on the grit and reality of the past, please take a second to like this video and leave a comment. Even a single word helps the algorithm realize this content matters. It is a small gesture, but it truly helps us continue to bring these stories to life. Thank you for being here. Now, let's look at why the Sultan's march into the north began with a warning he chose to ignore. When Mehmed crossed the Danube, he expected to find cities to sack and granaries to feed his men. He found nothing. Vlad had ordered every village burned to the ground. Every field of rye was a patch of black ash. But the most effective weapon wasn't fire. It was the biological vacuum. Vlad knew that an army of 150,000 men lives on its stomach. By poisoning every well with the carcasses of rotting livestock and diverting rivers into stagnant marshes, he created a land that was toxic to breathe. The Ottomans weren't just fighting Wallachian scouts, they were fighting dysentery, fever, and filth. Vlad's tactical genius was understanding controlled pain. He didn't need to kill every janissary with a sword. He just needed to make them thirsty. He knew that a thirsty soldier is a desperate soldier, and a desperate soldier is prone to panic. As the Ottoman ranks grew thin from disease, the psychological weight of the silence became unbearable. They marched for days through a graveyard of their own making, hearing nothing but the sound of ravens. Vlad was training them to be afraid of the dark long before he actually attacked. He was stripping away their discipline, layer by layer, until only raw nerves remained. This was the setup. The night attack was merely the punchline. It is easy to look at these actions and see a monster. It is easy to label Vlad as a man possessed by cruelty. But that is a surface-level reading of history. To truly understand why he was able to walk into the Sultan's camp and remain undetected, we have to look at his education. We have to look at the years he spent in the Ottoman court. He wasn't a stranger to the men he was killing. He was their brother. He was their student. He knew their passwords because he had spoken them since he was a child. Before he was the nightmare of the Ottoman Empire, he was their most promising hostage. Most history books tell you that Vlad the Impaler was a primitive warlord who hated the Ottomans because of a clash of civilizations or religions. This is a common belief, but the reality is much more complex. Vlad didn't hate the Ottoman military, he admired it. In fact, he was the most Ottoman person in his entire country. When Vlad was 11, his father, Vlad II Dracula, handed him and his younger brother Radu over to Sultan Murad II as collateral. This wasn't a dungeon. It was a palace in Edirne. For years, Vlad lived among the elite. He sat in the same classrooms as the future Sultan Mehmed II. He learned the same logic, the same history, and the same brutal philosophy of governance. While his brother Radu embraced this life, becoming a favorite of the court, Vlad used his time as a biological simulation. He spent every hour observing the Janissaries. He watched their drills. He memorized how they guarded the Sultan. He learned exactly how their chain of command functioned. He wasn't just a prisoner, he was a spy who didn't know he was spying yet. In Edirne, Vlad witnessed the true meaning of power. He saw how the Ottomans used fear to keep a dozen different cultures in line. He watched how routine could be turned into a trap. He noted that the Janissaries, while elite, were also rigid. They relied on order. They relied on the Sultan's presence. If you broke that order, the entire machine would grind itself to pieces. Vlad also learned the Turkish language to a level of perfection that would later save his life. He didn't just speak it, he understood the dialects and the military slang. This gave him a weapon that no other Christian prince possessed, the ability to vanish in plain sight. He realized that in an army of 150,000 men from all over the world, people don't recognize faces. They recognize voices. They recognize authority. If you sound like you belong, you can walk right up to the throne. By 1462, Vlad was back on his throne, and the Sultan sent envoys to collect the jizya, the tribute of 10,000 ducats and 500 boys. When the envoys arrived at his court in Târgoviște, they refused to remove their turbans, citing their religious custom. Vlad did not argue. He did not yell. He simply noted their dedication to their customs. "I wish to strengthen your devotion," he told them. He then ordered his guards to nail the turbans to their skulls with small iron spikes. It was a cold, calculated act of theater. He knew the news would reach Mehmed. He knew it would provoke a massive response. This wasn't a lapse in judgment, it was a deliberate invitation. He wanted the Sultan to bring his massive army into the blackened, poisoned landscape of Wallachia. He wanted the giant to step into the trap he had been building since his childhood in Edirne. The Ottoman army did not just walk into Wallachia, they marched into a void. As Mehmed's vanguard crossed the Danube, they were met with a silence that was louder than any battle cry. This is where Vlad's psychological trap began to tighten. Imagine being a soldier in the most powerful military force on earth. You are used to conquest. You are used to seeing the enemy flee. But here, there is no enemy to fight. There is only the land. Vlad's strategy was to turn the environment into a weapon of attrition. Every mile the Ottomans moved inland, the harder it became to breathe. The smoke from burned rye fields hung in the air like a heavy blanket. The wells were not just empty, they were death traps. Vlad had ordered his men to throw the bodies of diseased livestock into every water source. This created what we call the controlled pain phase of the campaign. The Ottoman soldiers began to fall, not to arrows, but to their own thirst. By the second week, the Grand Army was slowing down. Dysentery began to rip through the ranks. High-ranking officers were found dead in their tents, their throats slit by shadows that left no footprints. The Ottoman scouts, the Akinji raiders, returned with stories of woods that seemed to move. They described finding messages written in perfect Turkish nailed to the doors of abandoned churches, telling them to go home while they still had legs to carry them. Vlad was proving a point: you can conquer a city, but you cannot conquer a ghost. But the real psychological break wasn't coming from the poisoned wells. It was coming from the campfires at night. Every time the sun went down, the Ottoman soldiers felt the weight of 10,000 eyes watching them from the tree line. They knew the Wallachians were there. They could smell the wood smoke from invisible camps. But every time they charged into the brush, they found nothing but cold ash. This constant state of high alert was draining their cognitive reserves. A soldier who cannot sleep is a soldier who cannot think. And Vlad was about to give them a reason to never close their eyes again. While the Sultan sat in his grand pavilion, protected by layers of elite guards, Vlad was much closer than anyone realized. This is the moment where Vlad's childhood in the Ottoman court became his ultimate tactical advantage. He didn't just send spies into the camp, he was the spy. Dressed in the silk and wool of a Turkish merchant, Vlad walked through the Ottoman lines. His Turkish was flawless. He didn't just speak the language, he spoke the culture. He knew the passwords. He knew the specific way a janissary held his pike. He walked through the clusters of tents, noting the location of the gunpowder wagons and the distance between the supply trains. Most importantly, he located the Sultan's personal quarters, a massive tent marked by 3 golden crescents. He saw the exhaustion in the men's eyes. He heard the grumbling of the officers. He realized that the size of the army was actually its greatest weakness. In a camp of 150,000 people, no one knows everyone. If you look like you belong, and you sound like you belong, you are invisible. Vlad spent hours cataloging the layout of the camp, memorizing the rotation of the night watch. He wasn't just looking for a way to kill the Sultan, he was looking for a way to make the army kill itself. He left the camp as quietly as he entered, carrying the blueprint for the largest slaughter in Wallachian history. June 16, 1462. The air is thick and humid. The moon is a thin sliver, offering almost no light. South of Târgoviște, the Ottoman camp is a city of canvas stretching for miles. 150,000 men are trying to find sleep in a land that wants them dead. A few miles away, in the deep cover of the forest, Vlad stands before 7,000 of his best cavalry. These are the boyars and mercenaries who have survived the last month of scorched earth retreats. They are lean, hungry, and desperate. Every horse has its hooves wrapped in thick layers of cloth. Every piece of armor has been rubbed with soot to kill the reflection of the firelight. There is no talking. No shouting. Just the sound of leather creaking. Vlad knows this is his only chance. He cannot win a war of numbers, but he can win a war of seconds. He tells his commanders one thing: follow my lead. When I speak, do not hesitate. If you see a man in a turban, he is the enemy. If you hear a command in Turkish, it is likely mine. The plan is simple: cut the head off the snake. If the Sultan dies in the first 10 minutes, the empire dies with him. 1 a.m. The first Wallachian scouts slip past the outer perimeter. They don't use swords, they use garrotes and daggers. The sentries die without making a sound. Then, at a signal from Vlad, the silence is shattered. A massive explosion rips through the southern edge of the camp. Vlad's men have reached the gunpowder wagons. Suddenly, the darkness is replaced by a blinding, orange glare. Fireballs climb into the sky, turning the tents into tinder. 7,000 horsemen scream as they charge into the heart of the Ottoman lines. But they aren't screaming in Romanian. They are screaming in Turkish. The Christians are attacking from the west. The Sultan is being killed. Form ranks at the supply depot. The Ottoman soldiers, jolted awake by explosions and screams, grab their blades. In the flickering firelight, they see shadows running everywhere. They hear orders being shouted in their own tongue. Panic, the most contagious disease in history, takes hold. A janissary sees a figure running toward him and swings his scimitar. He doesn't realize until it's too late that he has just killed his own sergeant. In the smoke and the fire, uniforms look the same. Language is the only way to identify a friend, and Vlad has stolen their language. This was the chaos mechanism in action. Vlad understood that an army this size relies on the expectation of order. When that order is replaced by tactical contradiction, when the people giving orders are actually the ones killing you, the brain shuts down. The Ottomans began to form defensive circles, but they were forming them against each other. In the center of the camp, Sipahi cavalry clashed with their own infantry. They were trapped in a loop of their own making. Every time they tried to reorganize, another Wallachian unit would appear, shout a new, conflicting order in perfect Turkish and vanish back into the smoke. Vlad's men moved like a scalpel, ignoring the bulk of the army and carving a direct path toward the three golden crescents. Vlad himself led the spearhead. 200 elite riders burst through the final line of guards and into the royal pavilion. They hacked through the silk walls. They found viziers, secretaries, and advisors scrambling in their night clothes. They killed everyone inside. But the bed was empty. Mehmed II, ever the pragmatist, had switched tents at the last minute. He was sleeping in a smaller, nondescript tent several hundred yards away. The identity loop had saved the Sultan's life. Realizing the primary target was gone and that the Ottoman Janissary Corps was finally beginning to solidify their ranks around the firelight, Vlad didn't hesitate. He blew the horn for retreat. He didn't stay to fight a losing battle. He had achieved his secondary goal. He had turned the Sultan's pride into a pile of ash. Dawn breaks over the Wallachian camp, but it brings no warmth. The fire from the gunpowder wagons has died down, leaving only a thick, white haze that clings to the ground. As the smoke clears, the true scale of the self-inflicted massacre is revealed. 15,000 Ottoman soldiers lie dead. Mehmed II crawls out of his secondary tent. He is uninjured, but he is fundamentally changed. He looks at his elite guards, men who have never known retreat, and sees eyes filled with a new, sharp kind of terror. They weren't defeated by a superior army. They were defeated by a ghost who spoke their language. The Sultan orders the march to continue toward the capital, Târgoviște. He needs a victory to restore his men's spirit. He needs to see Vlad in chains. But as the army moves north, the outcome loop we discussed earlier begins to manifest. The deeper they go, the more the land feels like a trap waiting to snap shut. 30 miles from the capital, the Ottoman vanguard stops. The horses refuse to move forward. The air here is different. It is heavy with a scent that no amount of incense can cover. Mehmed rides to the front of the column to see what has paralyzed his men. Stretching for 7 miles is a sight that would haunt European memory for centuries. It is a field of 20,000 stakes. On each one is an Ottoman prisoner. In the center, on the highest point, is Hamza Pasha, the Sultan's own general, dressed in his fine silks, rotting in the sun. This is the contradiction loop. Mehmed came to bring order to a rebellious province. Instead, he found a physical manifestation of his own methods turned against him. There was no battle here. There were no walls to batter down. Just 20,000 silent witnesses to Vlad's resolve. The soldiers who survived the night attack now look at this and realize, the man they are hunting isn't playing by the rules of war. He is playing by the rules of the end of the world. Mehmed II, the man who stared down the walls of Byzantium, finally speaks. One chronicler recorded his words, and they weren't the words of a conqueror. They were the words of a man who had reached his limit. It is not possible to deprive a man of his country who does such things, he supposedly whispered. The order is given. The retreat begins. The most powerful army on the planet turns its back on the capital and begins the long, thirsty march back to the Danube. Vlad has won. Not with steel, but with the sheer weight of a psychological burden that the Sultan could no longer carry. This is where we close the loop. You might expect the story to end with Vlad's triumph, but history is rarely that clean. Vlad saved his country from the Sultan, but he couldn't save it from itself. The Ottoman Empire changed tactics. If they couldn't break Vlad with cannons, they would break him with a face he recognized. They sent in Radu, Vlad's own brother. Radu didn't burn fields, he offered the boyars a way out. He offered them peace, trade, and an end to the terror. The very people Vlad had fought to protect began to see him as a liability. Within months of his greatest victory, Vlad was a fugitive, betrayed by his own nobles and eventually imprisoned by the Hungarians. The man who broke an empire spent the next 12 years in a cell, far from the land he had scorched to save. This is the tragedy of the historical hero. The traits required to survive a revolution are rarely the traits required to lead a peace. Now you know the truth of the night attack. It wasn't just a raid. It was the moment a single mind, forged in the fires of captivity, dismantled the world's most disciplined military machine. Vlad didn't use magic, and he didn't have a massive army. He had two things: knowledge of his enemy and the courage to become the nightmare they feared. History doesn't remember Vlad for his administrative policies or his economic reforms. It remembers the stakes. It remembers the muffled hooves in the dark. It remembers that sometimes, when a giant comes to your door, the only way to survive is to make the giant afraid to close his eyes. Thank you for watching this journey into the dark corners of the past. If this story changed how you think about power, make sure to share it. The road of history is long, but we only walk it together.